It's amazing when you stop and think about it, the sheer variety of life all around us. I mean, you've got a tiny bee buzzing around collecting pollen, and then you look up and see this massive redwood tree, maybe hundreds of years old.
It really makes you wonder how all that diversity came to be, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a huge question, and one we're going to explore today in our deep dive.
Oh, this is going to be interesting.
It is. We're taking a look at a fascinating approach to a really fundamental concept, evolution. And for this deep dive, we're specifically focusing on the origin of species. But, and here's the twist, not the original super dense text by Darwin.
I was going to say, that's quite a tome to tackle.
Right. But we're looking at a picture book adaptation, beautifully illustrated by Sabina Radeva.
A picture book about evolution. Okay, I'm intrigued.
I think you'll really appreciate this one. It's aimed at making this complex scientific theory accessible. And not just for kids, but for anyone who wants a fresh perspective on the topic.
So what's our mission for this deep dive?
Well, we're going to unpack the core ideas of evolution as Radeva presents them. We've got a bunch of reviews and descriptions of the book to guide us, so we're basically going to see how she takes this dense scientific theory and makes it, well, not so dense.
That's a valuable service, to be honest. Evolution can be a tough concept to grasp, even for adults.
It really can be. But Radeva has this really interesting background that I think makes her uniquely qualified to do this.
Oh. What's her background?
So get this. She was a scientist studying molecular biology.
Wow, so she knows the hard science behind it all.
Yeah. But then, and this is what's so cool, she became an artist and an illustrator.
That's quite a combination. I can already see how that would benefit a project like this.
Exactly. From what I've read, that blend of science and art allows her to explain these complex concepts in a way that's both accurate and super engaging. And apparently, her two daughters were her inspiration for tackling this.
Oh, that's sweet. So she really wanted to make it understandable even for younger audiences.
It seems like it. And her work has definitely made a splash. The book has been translated into 31 languages, 31, and it's even been shortlisted for some major awards like the Waterstones Book of the Year and the German Youth Literature Award.
Okay, so she's clearly doing something right. So how does the book actually start? How does she approach explaining evolution?
Well, the reviews all highlight how she starts by setting the historical context. Like, before Darwin came along, the common belief was that all living things, every plant and animal, were created in their current forms all at once.
Right, that was the prevailing view for a long time. Then Darwin came along and sort of shook things up.
Exactly. And the book does touch on Darwin's work, specifically his groundbreaking discoveries in the 1800s. Apparently, a lot of his ideas came from, just observing the huge variety of plants and animals he encountered during his travels.
Of course, his famous voyage on the HMS Beagle, that's got to be a key part of the story.
It was a pivotal experience for him. But even though the ship itself is an essential character in this retelling, what it represents, exploration and the discovery of new life forms, is definitely there.
So through his observations, he started to question that whole everything was created at once
Yeah.
idea.
Yeah. He started noticing these subtle differences between creatures that seemed related but lived in different places. And that's what led him to his big idea. Evolution, the idea that living things actually change gradually over a really, really long time.
Like, it's not that everything just popped into existence as we see it today.
Exactly. Life is constantly evolving across generations. It's a huge concept that basically changed how we understand the whole natural world, and it's at the very heart of Radeva's book.
So how does she actually explain this big, complex idea in a way that's supposed to be accessible?
Well, according to the reviews, she breaks it down into these key components, and the first one she tackles is variation.
Variation. Okay, so what's that all about?
So the basic idea is that even within the same kind of living thing, like let's say dogs, there are always slight differences. Some dogs have longer fur, some have shorter fur, some are bigger, some are smaller, and so on. It's like how you and I might have different eye colors.
But even though we're both humans, we're not identical.
Exactly. And the book uses examples like that, different fur lengths in dogs or the patterns you see on pigeon feathers, to really illustrate this idea that no two individuals are exactly the same.
Okay, that makes sense. So everyone's got these little variations. But how does that lead to bigger changes, like evolution?
Well, that's where the next big concept comes in, natural selection. And this is where it gets really interesting. So some of these variations, those little differences, can actually give an individual an advantage in their environment. Maybe a certain type of beak makes it easier for a bird to find food, or perhaps a particular fur color helps an animal camouflage better.
Ah, I see. So it's not just random differences. Some of them actually make a difference in terms of survival.
Precisely. And because those individuals are better suited to their environment, they're more likely to survive, right? And if they survive, they're more likely to reproduce and pass on those advantageous traits to their offspring.
So those helpful traits become more common in the next generation. Makes sense.
Yeah. And over time, that leads to adaptation, which is the next big piece of the puzzle. As this process of natural selection keeps going, generation after generation, those helpful traits become more and more common. And the book uses the example of a cactus, how its thick skin helps it store water and survive in the desert.
That's a good example. It's perfectly adapted to its harsh environment. So basically, over time, these small advantages add up and help a species thrive in a particular place.
Right. But here's where it gets mind-blowing. If those small changes keep happening over a super, super long time, like millions of years, it can actually lead to the formation of brand new species.
Wow. So starting with tiny variations, you can eventually end up with entirely different kinds of life.
That's the power of evolution. And it all happens gradually, not overnight. It's this slow, steady process.
It's amazing to think about. It's like those tiny variations are like the building blocks of evolution.
You got it. Now, I know when you hear the title, The Origin of Species, you might picture a book with, characters and a plot, like a regular story.
Yeah, I was sort of expecting that.
But Radeva does something different here. She actually uses the diversity of life itself as the characters.
Oh, that's interesting. So who are the characters in her book?
Well, think about all the different plants and animals. Darwin observed all sorts of birds, colorful insects like butterflies and bees, different types of flowers, you name it. They're not characters in the sense that they talk or have personalities or anything.
So it's less about storytelling and more about showcasing the variety of life.
Exactly. They're there to visually represent the ideas she's explaining. Like you might see a beautiful illustration of different types of finches with their various beak shapes, and that would be a way to demonstrate variation.
Ah, so the visuals themselves tell the story of evolution.
It's like the pictures are doing the heavy lifting along with the simple explanations.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
But wait, isn't there one main character in the book?
Well, in a way, yeah. Charles Darwin himself is sort of a central figure. It's not a straight up biography or anything, but the book does touch on his journey as a scientist, how he made all these careful observations and developed his ideas about evolution.
So it's like following his thought process as he figures things out.
Right. And that adds a human element to it, which can make it even more engaging.
I like that. It makes him relatable, showing how he arrived at these world-changing ideas. Okay, so we've talked about the book's content, but I'm curious. What are the really key takeaways? Like, why should someone be interested in reading this book or learning about evolution in general?
Great question. So the main themes the book explores are really at the heart of evolutionary theory. You've got evolution itself, the idea that life changes over time.
Right, the core concept.
Then there's adaptation, how living things evolve to be better suited to their environment.
Like that cactus example we talked about.
Exactly. And of course, natural selection, the process that drives adaptation.
That's like a chain reaction, from variation to natural selection to adaptation, all contributing to evolution over time.
Exactly. But there's more. There's variation, which is kind of the starting point for it all. And then there's this beautiful idea of the interconnectedness of life.
What do you mean by that?
Well, the book emphasizes that all living things, from bacteria to elephants to humans, are related in some way. We all share a distant common ancestor way back in time. It's like this giant family tree, and we're all part of it.
That's pretty mind-blowing when you think about it.
It really is. And finally, the book also highlights the whole process of scientific discovery. It shows how Darwin asked questions, observed the world, and came up with new ideas. It emphasizes that science isn't about having all the answers right away.
It's about constantly learning and refining our understanding, right?
Absolutely. And that's a valuable lesson for anyone, not just scientists. Okay, so why is this particular book so important? Well, first of all, it makes evolution accessible.
Especially for younger readers or people who might find the original Darwin text a bit intimidating.
Right. The illustrations are beautiful and the language is clear and easy to understand. It can really spark curiosity about science and the natural world.
And I bet it's a great resource for families to explore together, too.
Absolutely. You can sit down with your kids, flip through the pages, and have these amazing conversations about where life comes from and how it changes.
It's kind of like planting a seed of scientific inquiry early on.
That's a great way to put it. And who knows, maybe reading this book will inspire someone to become a scientist or just make them appreciate the natural world a little bit more.
That's the power of a good book, isn't it?
It really is. And if this deep dive has made you curious about evolution, there are other great resources out there too. The reviews mention a few children's books that tackle similar topics in really engaging ways.
Oh, like what?
Well, there's one called The Story of Life, a first book about evolution by Catherine Barr. It's got simple text and really bright illustrations that take you through the whole history of life on Earth.
Sounds pretty comprehensive.
It is. And then there's Grandmother Fish, a child's first book of evolution by Jonathan Tweet. That one focuses on the connections between all living things and traces our ancestry all the way back to, well, fish.
Grandmother Fish.
Right.
I love that title.
Right, it's cute. And then there's Mammals Who Morph. The Universe Tells Our Evolution Story by Jennifer Morgan. That one's all about the evolution of mammals, including us humans. And Our Family Tree, an evolution story by Lisa Westberg Peters. That one starts with single-celled organisms and traces the whole journey up to humans.
It's amazing how many different books there are now that explain evolution in a way that kids and even adults can understand.
It is. And finally, there's one called One Day a Dot. The Story of You, the Universe, and Everything by Ian Lendler. It gives you this really broad overview of the whole history of the universe, and evolution is just one part of that larger story.
So, something for everyone, depending on their interests and how deep they want to dive in.
Exactly. And it just goes to show you there are so many ways to learn about science, even complex topics like evolution. So there you have it, a deep dive into Sabina Radeva's The Origin of Species. A fantastic way to approach this incredible story of life on Earth.
It really is, taking a huge scientific work and making it accessible for a wider audience.
And it leaves you with something to think about, doesn't it? If life on Earth has changed so much over millions of years, what other things might be slowly changing around us right now? What other scientific mysteries are out there waiting to be explored?
Those are questions worth pondering, for sure.
They are. And hopefully this deep dive has sparked your curiosity to go out and explore those mysteries. Thanks for joining us.
It's been a pleasure.